put them all together and there's a mess. But right now, Saudi Arabia is having economic problems. There, you know, in the 70s, it was guaranteed. They were the kingpins. They had the money and they financed our debt, and that's where we bought so much of our oil. But that isn't the case right now. But the people are starting to suffer. If you're going to have a civil war, sometimes the winners of the war comes from the people. Maybe it's a bloody contest, but eventually they have to get support of the people. And right now, there's a lot of unhappy people there, a lot of Saudis who aren't employed. And so they're not the rich country that they used to be. And this may, you know, be a real problem for them to deal with the people now that are having their standard of living lowered.
Yeah, you know, they've had to enact some sweeping reforms. They put in a very unpopular austerity program for their vast bureaucracy. Everyone sort of works for the state, and they had to tighten the belt, so that became very unpopular. They actually had to even overturn part of that. But, you know, and this is, I think, where you can see some fault lines, some friction. Bin Salman recently spent $500 million on a yacht that caught his eye in the south of France. So you can imagine these problems with austerity. You know, they're stuck in the desert. They at least want to get some decent money. And then you have the king spending very, very wildly. You also have 33% of 15 to 24-year-olds completely out of work, and it's a very young country as well. So I think you have the seeds being sown for this kind of conflict.
You know, and Qatar is involved in this thing too, because Saudis are very aggressive now. It reminds me of how we treat our allies. They're allies as long as they're obedient. And as long as all the Persian Gulf countries were obedient, you know, to Saudi Arabia, they were okay, but all of a sudden there was too much independence with Qatar, and now they have been threatened, and it doesn't look like they're going to roll over. And that's going to add fuel to the fire too, because they're going to, if violence breaks out within that country, they can't help but you know, they won't ignore it. And the Iranians, although I can't foresee Iranian troops, you know, going into Saudi Arabia, no matter, but they're like a lot of others. They do have influence and they do have a position to take. I think that the amount of involvement they have in Yemen is probably overblown, but they have a concern about that. They have an influence, just like they have concerns of what's going on in Syria. So even though we're talking about Saudi Arabia and that government breaking down, it sort of blends into the chaos that has been created over there in the various countries. And the more we get involved, of course, the more chaos there is and the more breakdown. So this would be another example that we certainly, let's say there's a civil war and there's a breakdown and there's a regime change, even though we might not have been the number one factor, we are participating in it. You know, we go over and promise, oh, well, it looks like you're under a little bit of stress. Well, we'll guarantee you $100 billion worth of weapons to maintain order because we can deal with you. And besides, you know, you work with the Israelis to maintain order in the region. So I could see this.